Bonjour à tous, je suis heureux d'être ici ce soir. Malheureusement, je dois avouer, j'ai pas vraiment travaillé trop bien à l'école pour apprendre le français. Ça me permet pas de faire cette conférence en français, je veux le faire en anglais. Excusez-moi. Okay, this set, I was invited tonight to talk about les architectures du savoir. I was trying to find out what it could mean. I interpreted the theme to be, well, to talk about schools. Not only because we really like schools, but also because I think schools are one of the most exciting things to build as an architect. Before I want to enter into the discussion of the schools we have built or the ideas we have developed about school building, I would like to say a few words about the way we do architecture. Our office does architecture. We see architecture as something that very seldom creates something new. Many times you work with history, you work with examples, you work with things you know. A little bit like Abi Warburg was trying to explain art history back when he was trying to assemble things and kind of form a path of thought through images and through themes. I think this is how we like to assemble our projects, through examples, through experience we've done. And we really try to learn from what's around. We try to take architectural history as a source. There's no favorite style we have. There's nothing we think is right or wrong. It's more like we believe that in all kinds of periods there are interesting themes to find, and the combination of these themes, of course, then interpreting in a modern way, that's how we like to work. Surprisingly enough, many of our references have to do with renovations. Why is that? We have been trying to find out about this for a long time. We believe that it has to do with the fact that renovations are more complex than just buildings with one thought. When you are reacting to a building that's already there, you are never absolute. You always have to take your position as a relative position. You are not the first architect working with a building, and probably you will not be the last one. There will be someone after you interpreting the idea. And we really take a lot of enjoyment from that idea. Taking ourselves not so seriously and taking maybe the places and the buildings in themselves very seriously. Also, there are a few of our favorite buildings which I'd like to present, or favorite projects, I should say, just to give you a frame of reference of the themes we are working on. One of the most amazing buildings, if you haven't seen it, you have to visit it. It's a true cultural experience, is Sir John Soane's Museum in London. Sir John Soane was an architect who built himself a museum. It's a city house, but it's more than that. It's 3 lots put together. And on the inside, he created a universe of his own. It's a total work of art, architecture integrated with things he found, things he learned from the history of architecture. There are all kinds of jokes in there, all kinds of tragic stories. It's like a book through which you can walk. What we like about this place is its history. Sir John Soane, of course, he came from a very modest background. So first he bought the building on the left side. You can see that, 1796. And he lived there and he worked there. And when he had the chance to acquire the building in the back there, he started building his museum. When he became richer and richer, he was able to acquire more and more houses. And when he finally was able to buy this lot here, he was briefly contemplating generating a new building. So tearing this part down and coming up with this supposedly ideal design. So it's a top-down ideal design. For a number of reasons, he didn't follow up on that idea. For example, he didn't have the money, but also probably he found it very interesting to kind of accept that geometrical disturbance here and kind of accept that strange condition happening here with the stairs. And when you go through the history of the building, you can see that accepting that strange fact here really made the building much more interesting. So when you look at the spaces in there, you can see all kinds of symmetries and part symmetries, and those part symmetries then again lead to other spaces which again have symmetries in them, and those symmetries go across the chords. And again, of course, here something strange is happening. Since you're entering on one corner from the room, you're entering into this symmetry. Then there is all of a sudden depth happening here. So accepting the problem as an opportunity actually made this building much more interesting than this would have been. And this is one of the strategic choices we like to take when we encounter a problem. Many times we try to find what we can do out of that problem, what this problem can do to inform our building to make it more interesting. You can see these crazy kind of views. This was his drawing table. There would be a sheet of paper here, and there would be glass. He could see 3 floors down to this Egyptian piece, which he had bought, a sarcophagus from Egypt, which he acquired and brought here. So complexity is something that interests us, and problem is something that interests us. Another project which was quite important for us is by Peter, architects from Zurich, who did an early project it's a study, it's a kind of a regional study in a valley in Germany. This is a small town in the Rhine Valley, and this is a valley going down to the Rhine. And they were actually studying how to expand those industrial areas without disturbing the wind current, because the wind is very important for this town. The wind in the evening comes down from the mountains, it brings the cold air, and it creates a nice climate in the city. So what they were doing is actually they were studying the wind patterns, and they were placing their buildings together with a wind engineer in a way that they wouldn't disturb that wind flow. We think it's very interesting to connect something you really can't see with something as permanent and concrete as a building. But they didn't stop there. They then said, okay, these shapes which we are creating, they can be part of a very poetic new landscape. So they were thinking about what kind of plants could grow there, what kind of colors over the seasons they would create, and they were trying to draw an abstract kind of picture with buildings and landscape integrated that would change across the seasons. And then they didn't even stop there. What they did then is they were starting to think these buildings as shelves, as neutral kind of containers, which could then house a variety of uses. Because, of course, when you do a planning exercise like that, there's no way of knowing what will become out of it. So the very complex integration of all kinds of facts with buildings, and at the same time creating very open systems which allow people to change them and which allow a variety of uses. We find that very enticing. And the last project, it's a small house which stands close to Zurich, built by an architect called Otto Kolb. Otto Kolb was a Swiss who went to Chicago to work with Mies van der Rohe. He was teaching interior design. He built up a life in the United States, and then he decided to come back to Switzerland. And when he came back to Switzerland, he was almost bankrupt, but he had a brilliant idea. He invented this kind of a spiraling staircase. The spiraling staircase is a very modular thing, and he was selling hundreds and hundreds of them. And then he was able to build his own house. Of course, you can see Mies van der Rohe a little bit in there. You can see American ideas in there, those lifestyle ideas. You can see his stair, which he invented, is the central piece. But again, this house goes much, much, much further. You realize, for example, there's a chimney in there. That chimney heats up water pipes. Those water pipes heat the building. There is a spatial idea which is very radical. The house has no walls. It's all open. This was a little bit difficult because he had 2 daughters and a wife. they were all living in this open, continuous thing. So he was a very, very forceful guy. But the most incredible thing is how he was able to kind of unite an ecological vision with a very, very radical, stylish lifestyle plan. So you see here, there's water flowing around the chimney. You sit in there. There's a water reflecting pool out here, which brings the noon sun in winter into the house. There's all these kinds of ideas, and this was long before they started really propagating ecology. This is a very radical piece. So for us, this is a lesson how you can reunite very improbable things like ecology and lifestyle. He was also driving a Maserati to this house, so a very interesting person and very radical. All the furniture is done by himself. You see the bathroom up there, so it's really pushing things to the limit. So integrating things which usually don't go together, that's interesting. So now we come to schools. School buildings, why do they interest us so much? I think we share a common fascination maybe with Hans Scharoun, who was also doing a lot of schools and who was doing very important work in Germany after the war. For Scharoun, a school was almost like a small city. It was an urbanistic scheme. When you look at his drawings, this is a project which is never built, kind of an ideal project. There is the idea of interior streets, and then there is the idea of kind of quarters, like a quartier, and then you enter through gates. This is called a gate, where to put the clothes. So there's a community, a hierarchical community with a place that serves the whole, and then particular places that serve smaller groups, down to the last unit, which would be then the classroom. So this is very far from the kind of neutral container that schools used to be at the turn of the century, where you just had the hallway and you had the classes. There is a social idea behind this. There's also an idea about a child growing up and having a kind of a realm and then a common space and so on. And that's, of course, very interesting because it creates specific architecture versus general architecture. You see the same here now. This is a schoolhouse which he actually built, the famous Geschwisterschule. You see the same themes, and you see how the inside was treated and how the social space was actually formulated. So we believe that taking social ideas like that really seriously can create very interesting spaces, very interesting architecture. Of course, he took this one scale up. He took this principle to major public buildings like the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin, which was finished only after his death. You have here a true landscape of reading, a landscape of information. These are terraces with books. And then on the lower floor, you have this urban, like an urban space, a street-type space with these offices here. You can look into the things that are happening here, like an auditorium. It's truly a part of the city. It's truly a small city for itself. So we find that very interesting. Of course, then, there is another ideal of modernism. Of course, this is a caricature. This is just a kind of a project that brings it to the end. But there is this idea that structures should be completely neutral. And we are forced as architects to do structures that are not too specific. Of course, it's a demand that we have to answer to. And the question for us now is, of course, how to reunite all of our interests, which we have. Interests about specificity, interests about the social ideas, interests about creating places, creating parts of the city to reunite this with the postulates of modernism. One guy who did it very well was Le Corbusier. He was fascinated by the grids, by the grid as a kind of a tool, liberating the floor plan to the point where he was actually taking streets through the houses. This is a ramp going up, and you're actually entering the building as if you were an automobile. So there is a possibility of reuniting your neutrality with specificity, and I think that's what serious architectural work about schools should be all about. So I will show, after this introduction, I will show now a few projects which we had done. Different schools, they're all very different, they're all reacting to different circumstances, but maybe you find some of the themes which I introduced, you find them in these houses. This is the project we did a while ago in Zurich. It's in a new part of Zurich. The city is very traditional, but in this part of the city there are a few high-rises. It's like a modernist utopia from the 1960s, built in the 70s. And in this place here, which is like a back courtyard, there were two schoolhouses. One was here and one was there. And the competition was to build a new schoolhouse. The first thing we said there should be public space. So what you see here, this figure here, is actually public space. And we took the program apart into two separate houses to create this public space. So the public space was more important than the buildings. We separated the program. And then with the two separate projects, we actually reacted to this condition and to that condition. I will show you now a little bit more about this one. This is a school, kind of a special school, where people that after 9 years of school have trouble finding the transition to workplace or to studying, they can spend 1 more year. It's like a cycle d'orientation. You can do a number of things there. You can do handwork with wood, with metal, but they were also looking for a new wing in which to do informatics and kind of computer work, to teach computer work to the kids. The building itself was very, very nice building from a disciple of Le Corbusier, Otto Claus. He worked in Paris for years, came back and did these wonderful concrete things that remind you, for example, this building reminds us a little bit of La Tourette, of a cloister. The circulation is on the outside. These are a hierarchy of buildings. I will show it like that. It works like this. You have an entrance here. You have the main buildings for the administration, the woodworking, the metalworking, and the stone and clay working. Then you have an open system of circulation, and you have these secondary buildings which are infrastructural. This is for toilets, this is for changing your clothes and so on. We were very fascinated by this, and we were thinking about how to add something to a building that's as perfect as this, a very strong figure. So we analyzed and we said, okay, we have new program, we have classrooms. We will add a specific classroom building. We will add an infrastructure building, a part of corridor. And then there is this wonderful, strange element on top, which Otto Claus did just because he was he was a little bit like a poet or like a sculptor. He did this wonderful concrete sculpture. So we said, let's also do this very strange piece in our building. We recombined these elements to do something like this. You see a little bit of corridor, you see the infrastructure, you see the building and the strange element. And it adds up very naturally to this plan. It kind of, you almost don't notice that it's a new building because the dimensions, we kind of take them up. This is a stair going down underneath. And even inside the building, we are taking these hallways, these dimensions, and actually creating this very wide corridor. This is something we're very interested in, these public spaces in the schools. But there is also a problem. In Switzerland, the fire laws are becoming tougher and tougher. And it's not allowed to have anything burnable in such a corridor if the corridor is used to escape from the building. So if you make a nice wide corridor in an old building, if you have that, you cannot do anything in it because the fire police tells you no. So this now in Switzerland is creating a new topology, which is very interesting. You see this balcony up here. If the kids can run over this balcony, then this space is free. It's just circulation. It's not escape route anymore. So by adding that balcony, we are changing the type. We're also liberating the space. You can see how the old and the new buildings kind of go together naturally. We're creating, of course, new courtyards here. We are taking the material, which is concrete, and we are reinterpreting, of course, the traditional material in a new way. This is not traditional concrete, of course, but still it speaks with the old concrete, or like here in that stair situation. This is that courtyard I was speaking about. The idea is that the kids can go outside of the class and they can do work out there, because you can now put tables, you can put chairs, you can use it like a common classroom, because it's not used as escape route. And of course, the glazing here then creates the dialogue between the old facades, which are very nicely composed, and our new interior facades. And of course, then going down, you see that strange element, which used to be on the roof. It was this thing here, it's a chimney. Otto Kolb was telling people that from the wood shop, the wood, the chippings, they would go up there and they could burn it in the furnace for the heating. Of course, it never worked, but it allowed him to do this beautiful piece on the roof. So we said, let's do it and transform it and put it under our building, kind of enter into a dialogue with his building. The question of neutrality and specificity has been bothering us for a long time. When you have to do schoolhouses, you have to do neutral grids. Always teachers, educators, they tell you that no one knows the school of tomorrow, so make it as neutral as possible. The problem, of course, is a floor plan like that is also a problem for the kids, how to divide it up, how to create identity and so on. And this is something we work with a lot. In this school here, we were trying to show how it could be very neutral, how it could divide up, but also by placing these courtyards and by kind of creating these interior landscapes, we're trying to create places that are specific. And we're trying to give the opportunity, for example, if you leave away a few classrooms, to create these open areas, so you don't just end up with a long corridor and the rooms on both sides. So this is a constant kind of trouble we have. I think it's all about combining this principle, of course, which also goes back to Corbusier, which is kind of polemics about flexibility, to combine that principle, for example, with ideas by Aldo van Eyck, who was talking about the stairs, who was talking about the path through the building as being important. One project where we tried to do that is this school, a competition which we lost, in the north of Zurich. It's a very new part of town, and the houses standing around it, they are very kind of neutral. There is no blocks, there is no streets, but the distances between the houses are all the same, and they just kind of stand around. You don't really realize where the street is. If I would take the street away, it would be just banlieue. So we tried to think of this school as a public space, a place that marks the quartier, that gives it a center. This is why we brought the mass of the school to here. And then we were trying to exploit the topography, it's going down a little bit, to build a kind of terrace building like this. The sports fields, the play fields, the school building as a kind of a center, and then the sports hall underneath here. Of course, this is all very neutral and very bland, and it's lacking kind of identity. So what to do? We tried to create kind of a almost classical order with these columns, with these kind of sculpted columns, to interpret the grid, to give it more meaning than just being industrial on one side. And on the other side, we tried to create outdoor spaces that would actually offer kind of a public offering to the school, because we believe schools shouldn't be just used during the day, they should also be used during the nighttime, on the weekends, during the holidays as a public space. So trying to get that going. And then also to create inside the building, to create a strong identity without taking away the flexibility. We're trying to do this with this element which you see here, with this central staircase. We love stairs. We think stairs are amongst the most exciting things in architecture. And we were just trying to kind of bring this neutral stacking of planes, to bring this into a spatial kind of middle. You're seeing here what's happening over the floors. It's kind of a in-between thing between a pyramid or maybe a theater, or maybe also a sitting space, or maybe also a path. So it's not quite clear what it does. You can use it for a lot of things. It's a lot of things at once, and it really creates a strong identity in the middle without disturbing, of course, all the other spaces around. So that's one attempt to create identity. Another building which I'll show you, a competition, a project which happened because we won an urban competition. This is an industrial area near Lucerne. They were producing strings there, and of course the textile industry is going down. These buildings, they are very, very deep. I think this one is almost 100 meters, and there's no windows in between, so they were using huge floors. Again, there's this neutrality. But in this instance, there were very, very nice urban spaces created by the buildings. This industrial area looked almost like a city. Very nice facades, very differentiated, all kinds of textures, facades, nice materials. We actually said, okay, let's try to take this and let's try to not destroy it all, but really kind of work with it. So the urban plan, you see here this very deep block and the other blocks around it. The urban plan is playing with that, is keeping those urban spaces, which we think have quality, creating central spaces, but also, of course, bringing in light. This is a place where they still want to produce, still today, have some form of industry. So after we did that plan, after we won it, we were asked to think about separate houses. And one of the houses, you will see it in the perspectives, is this one. This was free, and they were trying to find uses, and they were trying to think what it could be, and they decided it could be a school. These are those urban spaces, new and old buildings combined, kind of these this depth. And this is this building which they asked us to think about. It's a building from the 60s. It's very industrial. On one side it has train access, and it has a vertical stocking machine without any windows. So the structure had to be changed, but on the inside it was wonderful. It had these, I think, 27-meter spans, these huge beams, complete freedom, and so we were able to really kind of, we had the tabula rasa and the problem of identity again. This is the structure. We analyzed the structure, which is very beautiful with these big concrete beams, trying to make sense of this building. The operation is this. Of course, we have to kind of take things away, for example, the train access or the vertical silo. And then we are left with a building that is looking a little bit less like an industrial building, more like a city block. And then we are trying to put a face on it to the riverside. This is an early study with a balcony for the escape problem that we encountered before. And this is now the finished variety, just bringing it up where we have to have it. So kind of bringing this kind of new face to the river and leaving that old industrial building in the back. We don't have to do much with a building like that. Unfortunately, we have to work on the facades. This is a true shame. Energetically, they are terrible, and this is a very tight budget. So we are fighting a lot. They want us to put in plastic windows. For Swiss architects, this is like committing a sin. I think I will go to hell. But otherwise we are doing very little. We are just putting in some walls, and these shifting walls, they are then accommodating a whole range of different programs. We're going to quickly go through. This is the media lab with the cutting spaces on the underground, and then an open ground floor with the auditorium, movie theater, exhibition, and so on. So you see how this plan, it can accommodate all kinds of things. And the identity then is happening in these staircases, and it's happening with this new face to the river, really. And then, of course, these very neutral spaces, it's almost non-architecture. There's almost the plan. We didn't really draw the plan. We developed it together with the people who are working in the building. It's almost non-architecture. But in that, it's very interesting, I believe. Taking yourself back as an architect to the point where you almost don't exist and just let the building speak. And these will be, for example, those ground floor spaces. I think these are exactly the kind of spaces that an art school wants. Not too much architecture, just structure, just space, and you can change it. I will then go on to two projects which are very different, but also in some ways they are the same, and I will try to compare them a little bit. One is a thing called Mongolian School Project happening in Ordos in China, and the other one is the Tony Areal. The first similarity is that the program of the two schools is almost the same. There's almost the same number of students, 3,000 students in each. There's almost the same number of teachers and almost the same number of square meters. But the site in Ordos was this big, and the site in Zurich was this big. The school in Ordos is a boarding school. It's on the Chinese border to Inner Mongolia, so it's a very undensely populated area, and they bring the kids to this boarding school because normally they could not go to school. They live somewhere in the hills way out there. So they are trying to concentrate them all. The consequence, of course, was that this school for the small kids had a lot of space, and this one had to be stacked. So it's treating a teaching program in a horizontal way and in a vertical way. The other difference, of course, was that in Zurich, we know what we're doing. We're knowing the city, but in Ordos, we didn't. We went there with the plane. We walked around a little bit, and what we saw was basically this. The city didn't exist yet. It's being built. So it's looking like that. They built the big axis. They built the government buildings, and I think our lot is up there. So there's no context. And for an office that's working with problems and seeing problems as a chance, this is really a terrible situation. There's no problem there. There's just space. So we were really desperate to find a place to start. And then we looked at the program. And the program was luckily very diverse. There was a lot of things, and there was a need to order things. We didn't understand what was happening with all these spaces, and we kind of were trying to find a way of organizing it. So sometimes we do very stupid things. We go read books, for example, about how Mongolians in the old times, how they used to move around or settle. And we are just looking at pictures, just out of desperation probably, not from a very intellectual point, but just kind of to get inspiration. We found this beautiful picture of Karakorum, one of the capitals of the Mongol states, and we were fascinated how there were tents, there were buildings, but there were also fenced in places. There were symmetry axes, there were hierarchical axes. So this is a palace, and these are just people living in that city in between. This is a ceremonial building, and so on. So there's all kinds of things happening, and these kind of flexible indoor-outdoor relationships, they were quite enticing. So we tried to think of this place, of this city, of this school again as a small city. So we started again with the outdoor space. We said there must be an entrance. In China, always you have to have a big gate, and there has to be a big writing, and you have to go in, which would be this first courtyard here. And then we came up with a system of courtyards which would then separate those uses from each other. There's a central building. The very small kids live back here and go to school here. The bigger ones here. And the high school students, they go here. So trying to kind of create, like Sharon, maybe these quarters. Kind of making sense of the program we were giving. Of course, then sports integrated as well. And with this urban plan, then we started thinking about typologies. For example, for the small kids, we said, let's bring them into buildings where they live in groups, maybe of 10 or 15. It can be a little bit like a family. So you have here these buildings that kind of have rooms of 2 or 3 kids around a central courtyard, and then they are combined. The school is a very low school. You have this courtyard typology here. For the bigger kids, we said, okay, let's separate the girls from the boys. This building here has a girl and a boy wing. And let's give them a school that's a little bit different already in topology. It's a more rational principle. It's not as playful as this one. It's more rational. There's also auditoriums in a strict order. And then for the students that have the last 2 years before the high school exam, we said, let's bring them to rooms of two each. So they don't have to sleep in a room with 20 or 30. Let's give them rooms where they can be two, you and your friend, so you can concentrate. And of course, this is this here for the girls and the boys. And then on that side, they have their school, which is quite rational, which looks like a grid in a kind of rational fashion. And in the middle, of course, there would be the buildings like sports building, library, and so on, and the Communist Party Central, what have you. So that was basically the scheme. We handed it in for the competition, and surprisingly enough, we won. And the mayor of the city said, your scheme is very human. We looked at the other schemes of the other teams from China. We knew why. So you see what's happening here. There's all kinds of differentiated typologies in the living and in the teaching. And then they see these outdoor spaces. For example, this is now the playground that serves the little kids. This is for the bigger kids. This is then kind of the interface to the central buildings. These guys, again, have their own entrance on that side and have their courtyards, and then the ceremonial court, and then another court that connects to the eating space and to the library. Again, we were trying to find these are very rational buildings. We're trying to find a kind of a decoration that we thought that the Chinese could build it, because obviously this was like flying a remote control airplane with gloves on your hands, with boxing gloves. It's very strange. The communication was very difficult. We never had meetings. We just got strange emails, and we said, okay, let's give them a series of renderings so they visually understand the project, trying to create the atmospheres and so on. This is the large hall, the dining hall, which we thought could also be used as a kind of a space where to have meetings and so on, or to have assemblies. The large library with a central court in the middle, science building with an exhibition space in the ground. And after handing in the plans, we never heard anything. And then with my family, I have 4 boys, and with my wife, we went on a trip to China, and then we flew to Ordos. And we went there, and they were building it actually, really. But I don't know what it looks like now. I've never been back, but it looked a little bit like what we had drawn. So this is the central kind of the science building, central building. And it's quite interesting how those very strong, simple shapes, how sometimes if you do a project as strong as this one, maybe then even that lost in translation thing with China, maybe it can even work. This was the central space of the library. Quite scary with these bricks not being fixed yet. I ran away as soon as I could, and these are the hallways around the courtyards. I don't know who planned it. I don't know who's building it. We just walked through it. And it looked a little bit like what we thought. Or, for example, the central eating space. Of course, in this kind of a situation, you cannot do details. Probably they will decorate it with dragons and all kinds of interesting things. But that's also nice. I mean, why not? And then the other project, which of course is very different, it's my hometown. Our office is here. The city center is down there, the station. And then this new part of city developing very rapidly. And in the middle of it is Tony Areal. Tony Areal is a place where they used to bring the milk of a quarter of Switzerland. So big trucks brought the milk there. And it was a big plant. Industrial plant, you can see it in the back. A true landmark in Zurich, and they made all kinds of things with that milk. They made cheese and ice cream, yogurt. It was great. Everybody loved the Tony yogurt because it came in a little brown glass, and it had a guy on the carrying milk on it, and it was very good taste. So people loved it. but probably also in France, the dairy business is not so good. So after 30 years, I think, or 25, the whole thing went bankrupt, and the banks had this huge building and didn't know what to do with it. And they were thinking, yeah, maybe we can do a big server farm, like for computers, or we can use it as storage. And then someone had the idea, no, let's bring schools in there. This was at the time when all kinds of universities were merging. So the art university was merging, the dance class, the music class, but also the producing arts. They were being brought together into one legal framework, but they were, of course, all in different parts. And they said, oh, this would be interesting to bring them all together here to create a real cluster of the arts. We just loved the building because we had gone there a lot of times. This was a music club here. There was one up there also. Also, they were having exhibitions there for 5-6 years. It was empty. So also we loved this ramp where they drove up with the trucks. We just loved that building and that part of Zurich. When we started the competition, we did a little check, like in orders, and we tried to understand the size. This is the existing art school here, where all the producing arts are right now. The red one, of course, is Thoune. This is where I went to school, the main building of ETH in Zurich, which Semper built, which was then called the crown of the city. This is Tate Modern in London, and this is the Pompidou. So we were scared. We were very scared by the size of the building, but also excited. Also, what we liked about the building was that it was really the picture of the producing process. They were working with these ramps for the trucks. They were working with gravity here. They were storing the milk up here and milk powder. So they had to build a tower on one side. And then you could follow the production process through the house. And this was cooling here. This is ice cream factory. This is where they fill the yogurt. Down here they are storing the cheese. So it's really a picture. It's not architecture. It's more like a machine with a skin. And the spaces were incredible. When we walked through, it was all cleared. They had sold the machines to Azerbaijan and I don't know where. And it was just neutrality. It was the no-stop city of Arkizum. The building was 70 by 130 meters like that, empty. So we tried to respect that. We tried to respect that neutral condition. We said, we don't want to cut this building up into pieces. We don't want to make normal office buildings out of it. We want to respect the dimensions, but what we have to do, of course, if we want to respect that, we have to make courtyards. So we proposed to dig the courtyards, and also, of course, we had to add square meters. So the structure of the house, luckily, was so strong, but it's possible to add an entire second floor here in steel. So I think in the future all houses should be built like that. You should have 8-meter high spaces, and then later if people need smaller spaces they can build something in, because then you can take it out again and you have these incredible spaces. And then we said we like the shape, we like the industrial shape, we like the high and the low, and let's just try to make that stronger. So we had to put some things up here, but also we tried to make much more up there. So that shape, very early, it was clear for us in the competition. And we also said it's very good. It has a head here, a high head, and on the back it has those ramps. And those two very different parts, they can act as an address. They can give the building a face, a little bit like in Lucerne with a balcony, give a face to the outside. When we built the building, after we won the competition, exactly that is what happened. These are those spaces. Here you see the whole length of the building. And then they were just cutting those courtyards in, really just like model building in one-to-one. And it was fascinating to see how you can really kind of do a one-on-one thing, like what you're doing in the model shop, it's happening out there. Another idea which influenced the project was the fact that these many schools, which were all over the city and which really loved their buildings, one was even in another city and one was out there, they all liked the places where they were, and now they had to come together into one building, this one here. So what does that mean? How do people who come together into this monster, how do you have to greet them? Or what kind of a structure do you have to find for them? How do you have to organize them? And of course the problem, this was the site area, I mentioned that earlier, this is the program area. So the relationship was the opposite relation. So not only they are all coming into one place, but they're also being stacked one over the other one. Luckily, it wasn't just education. There was also other program. We had some culture for the public. We had some housing. There are 100 apartments, 110 apartments in the tower. We have public functions and so on. So it's actually more than just a monofunctional thing. It's more like a campus where also people are living. But the thing that scared us the most about the project was the program. We had all kinds of spaces and very different spaces. We had music rehearsal spaces, design, classrooms, dance spaces, which were too big to put into the existing structure, and big halls and so on. But the problem was it took us so long to understand all the spaces. It just became bigger and bigger and bigger, and we couldn't find a way of fitting this all into this house. So we said, this is not architecture, this is more like urban planning. We're creating a vertical city. So at one point we said, we stop thinking about the program. It doesn't make sense. We don't understand it. We had 3 months for the competition. We have to stop thinking about the program, otherwise we will never finish the project. We will just create the streets in between. We will create the space in between, and then the program, it can always change, of course. It can fall into place, it can find its place, but what we have to worry about is the streets. So we went to the city, again, to that big scale, and we said, okay, there's a problem in this part of the city, it's industrial, and there's very few connections. We looked at the existing connections, these are footpaths or streets. There's a new park formed here, and there's one coming that way. Big artery here, the tram is stopping here, and we said, okay, let's take all those paths and let's bring them into the building, and let's connect the ramp, let's connect it with that part, and let's connect that park with those pedestrian relationships. And so we had, very early in the competition, we had this kind of a figure. It didn't quite look like that, but it was like that. There was a big hall here at the intersection of the tall to the flat part. There was those ramps here on that side, and then there were connections between that hall and those ramps, this part here. And then, of course, because of the topography, there were ramps going up. The first floor is 1 floor above the city. So when we had this figure in place, it became very easy. It was like city planning. We planned the streets, and then all the uses just kind of came into the building. You see the plan here? This is the first floor, the big hall, with the main functions like cafeteria, small place to eat, exhibition place, auditoriums and so on. Everything changed. For example, there was a theater here. Later there was no theater anymore. Now it's a museum. But it didn't matter because this was a stable program part. And then here the ramp. The ramp is creating addresses on the first floor, and then of course 2 floors up and on the roof again. And then there's connections, there's main paths. And of course the courtyards then are strategically located. So with this in place, the project couldn't go wrong anymore. I'm showing you now just a few pictures. This is maybe a month ago, we're building it. I'm showing you just a few pictures of those public spaces. And we're trying to do something like Sharon did in his National Library. We're trying to create spaces that almost look like outside spaces. So we're trying to form facades. This is the cafe, for example. In the back, there's the museum. This is a big wall where they can hang things. This is a bridge. It's crossing the space like in a city, like a railway bridge going across. Just trying to create that atmosphere. You don't quite realize if it's inside or outside. A very important element in this whole thing is the light. We were developing this light together with Realities United from Berlin. These are media artists. What they said is, if you take the light that the budget is good for, you have a certain budget. If you take that light and you bring it into the house evenly, it will be dead. You will have the same light everywhere, and it would look like a huge kind of factory or something. And they said, okay, we will take the light and we will concentrate it. So in certain parts, for example, here with the cafe, the light is almost as bright as daylight. Probably they will put some umbrellas here because it's really nasty. And in some other parts of the building, the light is very dark. Like on the other side of that hall, there's a dark place. And they said that's exactly what you should do. You shouldn't be nice to the artists. You should torture them a little bit with light, so they have to react. So they kind of have to, like in a city where there's spaces that are light and spaces that are dark, they have to react to that. Excuse me. And then, of course, the most important thing was how to reunite this big hall, that side of the building, with that ramp. I've mentioned you have these addresses up there. You're actually entering the building on several levels. And we came up with this idea of having a big cascade going through the building, and then some smaller spaces also in the high part. This kind of a situation that kind of allows you to go through the whole building, but just kind of slowly you go up. What was the most important thing for those kind of spaces? We wanted those spaces to be usable. So we had to be very careful not to use them for the escaping. So all the escape routes are outside of those spaces. Those spaces are just circulation. This is what we learned with that small school, which I showed you earlier. And you can really use it now. You can do exhibitions in there. You can have big meetings with a few hundred people. This can be really the center of the school. The lower part here, this hall, shows the original 7 meters 50, and it has a separate space on the side. It's a dark space, a neutral space, just a white cube. They can use it for anything, really. They can join it to this big space, or they can have it separate. It can be exhibition space, it can be installation space, can be meeting space, storage also. Up here we have a foyer for the musicians. There are, I think, about 1,000 students who study music, and they have no place to stay. They have no personal workspace. They just have their instrument. So when they are running around in the building, they will have a cafe up here on the 5th floor, where they can hang out, they can rehearse, they can meet, they can feel at home a little bit, because otherwise they are homeless. It was very important for us, the vertical connections, the stacking of the building, and this is why most of the stairs, we took them apart. We didn't put one stair over the other one, but we just tried to kind of create spaces, made the stairs a little bit bigger, so you kind of have a view across the space to the other side. You always have, you always know what's happening up there, what's happening down there. Of course, this is an escape route, so it's not so much possible in there. And then the hallways. This building has tons and tons of hallways, it's clear. There's so much program. But the important thing there was, one, to work with the light. Again, we are massing the light. And one, to work with the courtyards. You see the natural light coming in. And so you kind of have a succession of different kind of light down the courtyard. And those courtyards, of course, are very important also for the functions. They're bringing the light to all the spaces. Inside the building, of course, the majority of the spaces is very normal. These are workspaces, these are ateliers. Most of those spaces are very normal, but then also you have some special spaces. I will show you some of them. These are working spaces, atelier for artists, all kinds of things, printing atelier or sculpture atelier. Some of them open directly to the outside. You can drive in with a truck. So these are the normal spaces, and we treated them quite normally with a kind of a even light and so on. And then, of course, you have special spaces, and they are next to the public spaces. This is the museum. They are changing, they make changing exhibitions. they have a very nice collection of design works, chairs, posters, design things from all ages, which they are keeping directly underneath. This is a storage space which will be able to be visited. You can enter it, and you can actually see the things on the shelves. They can take you down for a tour. Another place that creates more identity is, for example, the library. It's a central library for the whole school. All the departments are sharing the same one. And there's a part where you can take the books directly, of course, and a big part of the books is also downstairs. There are a lot of special music spaces. This, for example, is a recording studio. It has a central kind of recording space, and then on 4 sides it has different smaller spaces to play the drums or to play other instruments, to sing and so on. And of course here also we try to go a little bit further with the detailing, with the materials and so on. And you can see how those spaces, some of those spaces then hang on to the open space. This is the end of the ramp. The ramp is coming up. There's a terrace. There's a big concert hall here, strategically placed for a symphonic orchestra. And this is this changed. These are old plans. These are 2 spaces where you can play organ concerts. So the idea is that the building is actually becoming public here. You can cut it off at night here, and then you can use this as a place to play music where the school can show itself to the public. This, for example, is the organ space as we imagined it, is a model that we built. We were even able to control the organ. They ordered a new one, and we said, let's make a little piece of architecture, like a little house. It's being built. It even has a little stair inside. It's like a 2-story house. And then, of course, there were inside this building, there were many fascinating spaces that we loved so much that we had to destroy. This is the high part. I was saying they were storing the milk, they were storing milk powder, and they had these big silos. And this was basically just an empty kind of situation. These kind of spaces, we found them. And these are the kind of spaces, when you see them as an architect, you don't want to do anything. You just want to leave them. This is Piranesi in its purest form. Why do anything? Well, of course, you have to do something. So when we did the project, we were trying to find some spaces and invent some spaces where you could still have that feeling. One of the spaces is between the high part. The high building would be up here, and the low part would be here, and it's a staircase building. And the people who were developing the project said, you are crazy, you cannot do this, you are creating space, you are wasting so much space. But we said, look, this is dark space, you cannot use it for anything. And so we were able to make a space like that, for example, and it's really for nothing, but it still carries the memory of the old school, and it of course leads you up to the roof terrace, and it brings nice views across the building. It's very important that you never feel enclosed. Always you have a window, and that window goes to the other part of the building. And again, there you have a window, so people see each other, and you see people circulating. This is something which we learned from Zone. Or, for example, this space here, which kind of is an echo to the big cascade in the flat part. It's also in the tall building. And we said, let's create a small cascade, which can be students' workspaces. So students have tables here and here. They can sit there and work. And at the same time, it's a stair. So you can enter here, you can go up, and you can go out here. So it's a shortcut. You don't, in the tall building, you don't always have to use the small staircases, but you can go through a space like that. It looks like this now. So that there will be people circulating and people studying at the same time. And also in the flat building we did this. This is, for example, a students' cafe where they can cook their meals, they can cook tea. This is an exhibition space, and upstairs there's a student's workspace. And we just connected them with a stair and another stair with the thought that maybe someone would enter from down there and cross the kitchen, cross the exhibition, cross the workspace, and then exit again. So to create not an absolute circulation, but also to create these back ways. Like in a city, you can go through the neighbor's garden and do a shortcut, and things become a little bit more anarchistic and not so controlled. We hope that this will work out. The most specific part of the building probably is this ramp. When we did the competition, the city architect said, "Oh, that's very stupid. This ramp. Why do you want to keep it? We could put a building there. We could make more square meters." But we said, "Look, this ramp is really the best part of the building because it creates a vertical urbanism. You can enter down there and up here and up there, and where can you find this? How many buildings do you know which you can enter from the outside like that?" And we said, let's program it. The public program, let's all put it to that side. So this is why we have the jazz club down here and the cinema here, an exhibition here, small chamber music here, the big concert hall here. So at night, this will be the public face of the building. It looks like this, kind of in between situation. I hope there will be no more cars later. There will just be people there. And the idea is really to bring people up and just kind of make them enter the building also on that side. Of course, it will also be interesting to see what artists can do with a space like that, with a purposeless space. It has an incredible scale, almost intimidating, but I think art is probably the only medium that can actually take care of something like that. These were some impressions. And then, for example, the jazz club, it's sitting under those ramps. Or up here is the exhibition space, so you can have an exhibition opening, you can go to the ramp to drink, to smoke, to talk on a nice summer night. And then, of course, this whole figure leads up to the roof, and the roof, as Corbusier said, is the fifth facade. And this is actually one of the very few buildings where we were able to really control the roof and really do something with the roof. The idea here was to again connect all parts of the building with a big deck to create a green middle here, to provide students workspaces out there. And also here there's a little creche, a kindergarten for the kids. So really to populate the roof, and also from the big concert hall, from that apero space, you can go up here and you can smoke. So that's what it looks like. Here you would come up then. And there's really this kind of secret interior landscape. When you're up there, it looks like you're somewhere in the banlieue with these strange factories standing around. You look into the courtyards, and you have trees. You have a kind of a strange utopian kind of situation. And then you have this deck with a nice view over Zurich. These are all the new skyscrapers coming up in this part of the city. One of the biggest challenges, of course, when you have an organism that's so multi-layered and there's so many people in there, and you have a building which you like so much, how to represent it to the outside. It's not just the shape, of course. The shape is also good. You can do the silhouette, you can do the ramp, but it's also about the materials. And we really actually kind of liked this very direct appearance that the building had before. A little bit mysterious. You don't know what's happening. This is the guy carrying the milk, the name, Tony. So we were trying to find an expression. We were trying to work with these metal sheets to create an expression where that kind of metal would become textile. And we found this wonderful example from Stockholm. It's a pavilion in the park of the King's Castle, where the guards would stay. And this is actually a metal building, but it looks like a tent. So it's like metal being used in a textile way, just by kind of giving these shapes and so on. And we were experimenting with that. We were trying to find a cheap material. This is a stretch metal. And just kind of giving it, like before, giving it that texture and kind of putting a veil around the whole building. So not to make it just an anonymous box, but to give it some depth and give it some poetry, and also a different appearance during the night and the day. And of course, on the inside, in the courtyard, there's an echo. There's a little bit less deep skin, but also there's a skin used in metal, and that's reflecting the light very nicely to the inside of the building. So the building is actually not really telling what's inside, but it's kind of alluding to the factory which is used to be, and it's also trying not to look as rational as those buildings, but a little bit more poetic. That's what it looks like today. The schools are moving in. It will be opening in September, end of September. And I have to say, it's actually one of the buildings that probably as an architect you can do once in your lifetime. And it a lot of thinking went in it. It's like a lot of stories finish in that building. But of course, the most exciting thing will be how the users will use it. It's a big mystery. I have no idea. It's a big experiment. It will be very exciting to see. I think I will be visiting it a lot and again learning a lot from that. And most likely in a few years some other architect will take that building and transform it again into something unexpected. And that's what I'm looking forward to most. Thank you very much. Of course, if you have questions, I'm very happy to answer them. You can talk to me in French, but I will answer probably in English.
Nous avons même un micro à votre disposition.
That's good, no questions. Very clear presentation. Sorry.
L'auditorium dans ce bâtiment, il est fait pour combien de spectateurs, combien de personnes? Vous avez dit qu'il y avait un auditorium, si j'ai bien compris. Combien de personnes?
Yeah, it's actually the auditorium is made for a symphonic orchestra, but in that case it would only hold, I think, 300 people. In the case where you would use a chamber music orchestra, or if you would have, for example, just speech, reading, it's also possible for that. It could hold up to 800 people. So it's flexible. It has a fixed part like that, and then it has a flat part in the front where they can move the chairs away, and then they can bring the stage for the symphonic orchestra.
Merci. À propos des écoles que vous avez montrées antérieurement, comment avez-vous observé l'installation qui en a été faite? How did you find it was made by the schoolmasters and the children?
Very different. Very different. Architecture is always a little bit of risk, and also it can go wrong, or it can go unexpected ways. The school I showed you, the cycle d'orientation, they are not using that hallway. They are not using it. There are, I think, 5 tables, and there are 30 chairs, and no one is sitting there. I don't know why. Maybe because the students are very naughty, and you have to keep them always under control. You cannot let them go out of the class. I don't know. This was interpretation which didn't work. The other projects, of course, some of them are not built. So I have not so much experience. The other school which I showed you I didn't show the pictures, but this is an elementary school. That is wonderful. They really are using it the way we think, and it's very lively in there. We did a renovation now. Some rooms changed function, but still it's working very well. But I think the most important thing for me in a school is not to do German Gesamtkunstwerk, a total piece of art. You have to give the people some space. If they hang up things, if they react to the building, it's okay. They should bring their furniture. They should paint on the walls. It should be possible, because the school is never finished. It's always developing. If you do something finished as an architect, I think you have a problem.
À propos des rampes de ce bâtiment, Est-ce que vous avez pensé au Castello San Gelo, où il y a une très célèbre rampe intérieure à Rome? Est-ce que ça vous a fait penser à ça?
No, but I have to go see it in that case. Can you describe it? What is happening? Why in Rome? What is the function of the ramp?
C'était pour monter à cheval. On y entrait en montant à cheval.
Ah, il faut absolument monter à cheval là. Hein? Ça serait magnifique. No, I think ramps. I'm making fun, of course, but ramps are very, very interesting things because they're not stairs and they're much more continuous. And the idea going up a ramp is that it's much more fluent and you can bring big things. You can bring a cheval, you can bring a car, and you are actually creating a different kind of address than if you go up a stair. And I think that Corbusier felt that. He was fascinated by automobile, mobility, all this, and this is why he used it so much in his buildings, to really bring the public into the buildings. So I think when you, as an architect, when you find a ramp on a building, serving the building, absolutely you have to preserve it. It's like a big gift. It's an incredible opportunity.
Et est-ce que vous tenez compte de l'orientation des bâtiments par rapport au soleil, par rapport à des choses comme ça? Est-ce que ça intervient dans votre projet, dans vos projets?
Well, it's difficult. We had to fit in so many things into this building. It's very difficult to orient it to the sun. You had to fill all sides. What we tried to do, we made all the 5 courtyards very different. Some are very straight and some are stepped. So to create some specific condition, when you walk past the courtyard, you know immediately which courtyard you are next to. Although they are using the same detail, same material, the shape is very different and the general atmosphere. But I think when you think about the classical postulates of architecture, lumière, orientation, all that, when you deal with a big beast like that, with a big monster, these kind of rules, somehow it's difficult to work with them. It's like in New York, the buildings are not buildings, there are beasts.
I really like the ideas you're going to transform the urban situation into the new situation, the old buildings into the new ones. Also with all the materials are you using and interpreting it in the new way. The only thing what I'm missing is how you were integrating ecological aspects in your projects, and is it very important, because you haven't talked about this kind of thing. I think we have to integrate that into buildings today as well. So are you doing that? Is it important for your office? And if you use it, how you use it?
Yeah, we do it, of course. Switzerland is ecological hell. And it's we don't have to worry about it. The laws and the regulations, they make us do it. This building is certified Minergie. It means it creates very little energy. Of course, it's impossible to do it energy autark because there's so much electricity going in. You do not have to heat it. You have to cool it. But the use of materials is clearly regulated. You know exactly what you can use, what you cannot use in terms of PCB and so on, all the different things that are nasty, you shouldn't use them. And there is a gray energy calculation, which we are very good because we're using the existing building. They calculated, in the beginning, they were thinking maybe we should take the building down. But they calculated that inside the building, all the steels, all the columns are solid steel. They calculated there would be a train going from Zurich to Genova in Italy, full with steel, if you want to take the building away. So leaving that in place is actually probably the number one ecological thing. And then, of course, all the things you do, you add to the building, they have to conform to the strictest laws. But, for example, let's say photovoltaics. This is an idea which many people have, but when you do the calculation for a building like that, you find out that you can cover maybe 0.5%. So that's where I become skeptical. I don't want to do strange projects doing advertising for ecology if it doesn't really contribute. So most of the things which we are doing here, for example, using the groundwater to cool and having air conditioning which recuperates the heat, and having for each material which we build, having a gray energy balance, all this, you don't see it in the finished building. So it is not screaming, I'm ecological, but in the end, in Switzerland, they kick you in the ass so hard you have to be ecological. It's not so much fun. And I think the thing that Mr. Kolb did with his little house, we are still dreaming of that. We still haven't found a solution. With buildings this big, the solutions are never so elegant. It's a big problem. And also, I mean, you have to go even further. You have to think about mobility. How do people come to this building? Do they use cars? No. There are 30 parking spaces, I think, for the school. And the rest of the parking spaces is for the people living in the apartments. So people have to come with public transport, or they have to come by bicycle. So, but this is not our decision. This is done by the city of Zurich, and they're being very, very hard on this.
Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question dans la salle, une dernière question? Alors, s'il n'y a pas de dernière question, encore merci pour cette conférence et vous êtes tous invités pour un apéritif dans le hall d'entrée.
Merci.